I was 33 years old when I woke up intubated under fluorescent lights and realized nobody from my family had come. Not my mother, who lived 18 minutes away and answered every church prayer chain within 30 seconds. Not my older brother, who once called me at 2 in the morning because his truck battery died in sleet and expected me to drive out with jumper cables. Not my stepfather, who used to introduce me as his girl whenever people were looking and as your mother's daughter whenever work needed doing. I had collapsed in the employee parking garage of the regional hospital where I worked, face first between the concrete pillar marked B4 and the dented blue sedan I still owed 14 payments on. A pulmonary embolism, they told me later, big enough to turn my oxygen levels into an argument. Serious enough that the ER attending called a rapid response before my badge even hit the floor. I don't remember the collapse itself. I remember fragments. The bite of cold air in my lungs. The sensation that my chest had somehow become smaller than the air it was supposed to hold. My keys slipping through my fingers. Someone yelling my name from farther away than they should have been. Then the violent white blur of ceiling lights sliding overhead as they ran me through the corridor I had walked 1,000 times carrying other people's charts. I am a respiratory therapist. Or I was then before my own lungs decided to become a case study. I knew enough to understand what everyone's face meant before anyone said the words. There is a particular expression medical people wear when the situation is bad and the patient knows enough to recognize it. It's not panic. Panic is messy. This is clean, controlled, efficient, like everyone has silently agreed to move faster than fear. That was the face on Theo Jenkins, our lead ED nurse, when he cut through my sweater with trauma shears and told someone to push heparin now. That was the face on Dr. Flores when she leaned over me and said, "Stay with me, Lena. Stay with me." That was the face I trusted more than blood. By the time they got me stabilized enough for ICU, the hospital had already called my emergency contact. That detail mattered later. At the time, I didn't know any of it. I only knew that when I finally surfaced 2 days later with sandpaper in my throat and monitors chirping around me, the chair beside my bed was empty. Not temporarily empty. Not somebody just stepped out for coffee empty. Untouched empty. No purse on the floor. No flowers. No cheap get-well balloon rubbing against the wall. No cardigan folded over the back of the chair. No phone charger snaking toward an outlet. No signs of waiting. No signs of worrying. No signs of a family that had rushed in and stayed all night. Only a paper cup of iced chips melting into itself and a note in Theo's square handwriting taped beside the dry erase board. "You scared us. Breathe. We've got you. Us." It should not have hit me as hard as it did, but it did. Because for one stupid, hopeful second, before I understood, I assumed my family had come and just missed the exact moment I woke up. It took me 4 more hours to ask. Theo was the one in the room when I finally croaked it out. "Did my mom come?" He was checking my foresight. He did not look up right away, which is how I knew the answer before he gave it. "Not yet," he said. "Not yet" is one of those medical lies adjacent to kindness. It means no, but I wish I didn't have to hand it to you this raw. I nodded like that made sense. I asked the second question anyway. "Did they call her?" This time he did look at me, and in his face I saw the professional calculation. How much truth can this patient safely handle with her heart rate already twitchy and her oxygen sap barely behaving? "Yes," he said. I didn't ask anything else that day. If you've never been the dependable one in a family, let me explain something that will sound pathetic until you've lived it. When the dependable one falls down, part of her still expects applause for falling efficiently, quietly, inconveniently. She doesn't begin with anger. She begins with embarrassment, with apology, with the irrational shame of needing. That was me in ICU, 33 years old, blood thinner dripping into my arm, wondering whether maybe the call had come at a bad time. Maybe Mom was driving. Maybe Aaron was at the lumber yard. Maybe Gail, my mother, Sandra's, women's Bible study was meeting. Maybe everyone was on silent. Maybe. My whole childhood was built out of maybes that bent in other people's favor. The truth arrived on day 4 in the shape of Marcy Bell. Marcy is a unit secretary with frosted lipstick, orthopedic shoes, and a moral code so rigid it could hold up a bridge. She had worked hospital desks for 27 years and therefore knew everything worth knowing 3 minutes before the people it happened to. She appeared in my doorway with a contraband vanilla milkshake and the expression of a woman who had tried very hard to stay out of it and failed. "You need some calories," she announced, setting the shake on my tray table. I thanked her. She stood there. Then she said, "Honey, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sip before I do." That is not how anyone opens a harmless sentence. I took one sip because she was serious. Marcy folded her arms. "Your mama answered the first call." I felt something inside me go very still. She said, and I quote, "If Lena's conscious, tell her not to dramatize this into a family emergency. Erin's got contractors at the house, and I'm not blowing up the whole week because she forgot how to take care of herself." I stared at her. Even now, years later, I can tell you exactly what part hurt first. Not the cruelty. I had seen that before. Not even the accusation. It was the phrase "blowing up the whole week." As if my blood clot were poor scheduling. As if my body had interrupted carpentry. Marcy kept going, because once women like her cross the line into honesty, they do not meander. "The second call was to your brother. He asked whether your insurance would cover it." My throat closed around the milkshake. She looked furious on my behalf, which somehow made it easier to breathe. "He didn't ask if you were alive?" I said. Marcy's mouth went tight. "No, ma'am." I turned my head toward the window because dignity is sometimes just deciding where your face will point while your life caves in. For the rest of that afternoon, nobody said family around me, if they could help it. They said support system. They said visitor list. They said discharge planning. They did not say what was becoming obvious, that the people I had spent my whole life answering had let the line ring out when it was my turn. I need to take you backward now because nothing in my family ever happened on the day it appeared to happen. Every disaster in that house had roots under 3 other floors. I grew up in Millhaven, Pennsylvania, the kind of town where everybody knows your business and pretends to call it concern. My mother, Sandra Whitaker Bell, taught Sunday school, arranged funeral casseroles, and had the special local talent of making control look like sacrifice. People loved her. Of course they did. She delivered meals to widowers and sang alto in the church choir and remembered everyone's grandchild by name. In public, she was mercy with lipstick. In private, she was bookkeeping. Not money, exactly. Not at first. Effort. Time. Access. Gratitude. Deference. Who owed whom what? My older brother Aaron was 37 months older than me and born with the family title I would spend the next 20 years financing. The one with potential. Aaron might not finish things. Aaron might borrow and forget. Aaron might break up with sensible women, bounce between business ideas, and discover at 34 that he was, in fact, not cut out to be his own boss. But Aaron had potential, which in our house meant everyone else should become scaffolding. When our stepfather left after 9 years of half-raising us and fully draining my mother's patience, Aaron got permission to spiral. I got praised for staying calm. Do you know how dangerous it is when a little girl gets rewarded for carrying what adults drop? By 15, I was the one balancing the checkbook when my mother didn't have a head for numbers. By 17, I was making Aaron's college aid calls because he hated paperwork. By 19, I was driving my grandmother Elsie to dialysis every Tuesday and Thursday because Mom had church board and Aaron had a girlfriend who really needed him right now. I don't say that bitterly. Or not only bitterly. I loved my grandmother. Elsie Bell was the first person who ever looked at me and asked a question nobody else in that family seemed curious about. "What do you want, baby?" Not "what are you doing for everyone?" Not "can you cover this one thing?" Not "you're so strong. Can't you handle it?" "What do you want?" I used to sit at her kitchen table after dialysis with a plate of toast and 2 sweet tea and tell her about my classes, my clinical hours, my dream of eventually opening a pulmonary rehab practice in counties where people had to drive an hour for basic respiratory follow-up. She'd listen like it was state business. Once, on a grocery receipt, she drew me a lopsided sketch of a storefront with 2 rocking chairs out front and wrote Lena's place to breathe across the top. I still have it. A few months before she died, she squeezed my wrist and said, "Don't let them spend you." I laughed because I thought she meant emotionally. It turns out she was being more literal than I understood. The official break with my family happened 3 years before the ICU. Aaron wanted me to co-sign a business equipment loan for a remodeling company that existed mostly as a logo magnet on the side of his truck. He came to me smiling, all confidence and sibling nostalgia, talking about how families back each other, and how I had the better credit, and how it would only be a formality. I said no. Not a screaming no. Not a dramatic one. Just a clean adult no. I offered instead to help him find a smaller secured loan, rewrite the business plan, and sit down with the bank manager I knew through pulmonary rehab. I spent 6 hours building alternatives. What I would not do is place my financial throat under Aaron's boot because he wanted somebody else's good name to drag his future uphill. My mother took it personally. Of course she did. In our house, boundaries were treason if they interrupted a man's momentum. She called me selfish in front of 2 aunts and a peach cobbler. Aaron said he guessed now he knew exactly what family meant to me. My mother cried, not because Aaron was in trouble, but because I had embarrassed her by forcing the truth into the room. Within 6 months, I was no longer invited automatically. Invitations became conditional, then absent. Stories about me circulated. I was too good for Millhaven now.
Lena had changed.
Lena thought a degree made her better than people. Lena didn't care what happened to her own family. The machinery was so familiar, I almost missed the important part. I had not been cut off for refusing love. I had been cut off for refusing use. Which is why, when I almost died in that parking garage, they did not rush toward me. Emergency only activates love in families where love exists separately from service. In mine, my usefulness had already been voted down. By the time I went home from the hospital, I knew enough to understand silence was deliberate. What I did not yet know was how long the invoice had existed. That answer came from my grandmother's oldest friend, June Harrow, on the first Sunday after discharge. June is 72, wears her reading glasses on a beaded chain, and knocks like she's delivering legal papers. She arrived carrying a crock-pot insert wrapped in towels and a manila envelope with my name on it. "I should have given you this sooner," she said before she'd even taken off her coat. "Your grandmother told me only if things got ugly enough that you'd finally believe her." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because the human body sometimes makes the wrong noise under pressure. June set the envelope on my kitchen table between my pill organizer and a stack of pharmacy receipts. She didn't push it toward me, didn't dramatize it, just rested her palm on the paper and said, "She loved you clear-eyed." Inside were 3 documents. The first was my grandmother's letter, 4 pages in blue ink, dated 11 months before her death, written in the neat schoolteacher hand that had signed every birthday card of my childhood. The second was a photocopy of a bank withdrawal slip. The third was a single page torn from a legal pad in my mother's writing. I knew it instantly. The loops too tight. The downstrokes angry. Sandra Bell never wrote a grocery list without making it look like testimony. My vision tunneled around the edges. June, practical as weather, poured me a glass of water and waited. I read the legal pad page first because I think some part of me already knew the direction of the wound and wanted it clean. It was a list of figures.
Dates.
Purposes. From Lena Education Account, $11,500 for roof. From Lena Education Account, $8,000 for Aaron equipment down payment. From Lena Education Account, $6,200 to settle IRS issue. Remainder to household until things improve. At the bottom, in smaller writing, almost annoyed by the need to record it at all. She has scholarships and can work. Aaron cannot start over from nothing. My knees actually weakened. I had to sit. Not because I'd never gone into debt. I had carried student loans, extra shifts, weekend on-calls, and 1 humiliating year of choosing between principal payments and replacing tires. Not because life was fair and I just discovered otherwise.
I knew better than that. No.
It was because all those years I had thought I was watching my family choose Aaron over me emotionally. And I had been wrong. They had chosen him financially first. Emotion followed the money, like mold follows damp. My grandmother's letter made the rest plain. When I was 16, after my grandfather died, He had left a modest investment account that my grandmother intended for my education. Not because Aaron was unloved, but because, in her words, he has always landed softer than you. She had trusted my mother to manage the paperwork while she recovered from surgery. Over time, withdrawals happened. Small at first, then larger. Explanations were given. Temporary needs. House emergency. Business bridge. Just until tax return season. Just until Aaron gets his feet under him. The money never came back. When my grandmother finally realized the account had been drained, the part that was left wouldn't cover a semester. She confronted my mother, who responded exactly as the legal pad implied. Lena can work. Lena is capable. Lena always figures it out. My grandmother wrote, and I will remember this sentence until the day I die. Capability is where selfish people hide their theft. I folded the letter carefully, because if I had moved too fast I might have torn it. June watched me with the exhausted tenderness of someone who has been waiting years for a younger woman to see what everyone else politely left alone.
There's more, she said.
I looked up. She made your mother sign a private acknowledgement that the account was used without your permission. I actually laughed then, a sharp disbelieving sound. Used, I repeated. June's mouth thinned. I'm choosing the word that won't raise your blood pressure. The acknowledgement was not legally elegant. No lawyer had prepared it. It was 2 paragraphs, dated and signed, witnessed by June and the pastor's wife. My mother admitted the funds intended for my schooling had been diverted to family obligations and stated she intended to restore them when possible. When possible. That phrase should be bronzed and mounted over certain kitchen tables. I sat there for a long time, my grandmother's letter in my lap, the old arithmetic of my 20s rearranging itself into motive. Why had Aaron expected my co-signature like oxygen? Because the family had already spent my future once and called it necessary. Why had my mother turned cold when I refused? Because in her moral economy, I was withholding what had always belonged to the household. Why did my brother ask about insurance instead of my pulse when the hospital called? Because even in crisis, the reflex remained the same. What will this cost us? Not how bad is it? Not is she scared? Not is she alone? What will this cost us? I did not cry, which probably makes me sound harder than I was. I just went very quiet, the way rooms go quiet when snow starts in earnest. For 2 days, I considered sending the documents to every relative in Millhaven. I drafted the text. I imagined the ripple, the church ladies, the cousins, Aaron's wife with her eyebrows all the way up. My mother's face when the first casserole call came in asking whether the rumors about my college fund were true. I wanted it.
Badly.
I wanted the story back. Then Theo came over with Thai takeout and found me at the kitchen table with the papers spread out like instruments before surgery. He listened. He read nothing because he is a gentleman. He just listened while I told him enough. When I finished, he asked one question. If you expose them, do you get free? That man had known me 11 years and could still find the nerve under armor. I looked at the documents, at the signatures, at my grandmother's careful loops telling me not to be spent. And I understood, with a kind of nausea, that public revenge was still a way of staying tied to the same hook. I would still be orienting my life around what they had done, still waiting for the town to issue a verdict, still asking the wrong jury to call me innocent. So, I put the papers away. Not because my family deserved mercy, because I did. Week 6 of recovery, my mother sent the first direct contact. A sympathy card. Not a get-well card. A sympathy card with lilies on the front and inside, in her tight blue ink. I'm sorry things have become so strained at such a difficult time. Aaron is under terrible pressure right now. We all have burdens. I hope when you're stronger you'll remember who raised you. No mention of nearly dying. No mention of the hospital call. No mention of the education account. Just burden as weather. As equal distribution. As though we had all been assigned proportional misery, and mine was poor citizenship for noticing the math. At the bottom, she had added, P.S. Please don't involve outsiders in private family misunderstandings. It only makes healing harder. Outsiders. That told me more than the rest. She knew the documents had surfaced. She did not know exactly what I had, but she knew some piece of the sealed room had come unlatched. Her instinct was not confession. It was containment. I put the card through my shredder and felt nothing except an odd, new steadiness. The next turn came a month later when Aaron had a cardiac scare of his own. Not a heart attack. Panic, dehydration, sky-high blood pressure, and the kind of chest pain men get after 15 years of pretending consequence is a personality flaw in other people. The ER kept him overnight. Since I worked in the same hospital system, I knew before noon. By 2 o'clock, my mother was standing in the lobby outside pulmonary rehab waiting for my shift to end. She had done her face for reconciliation. Soft lipstick, navy blouse, pearl studs. The version of Sandra Bell designed to make bystanders think forgiveness should be easy. "There you are," she said, smiling like we had merely missed 2 lunches rather than survived a burial. She bought me coffee I did not ask for, and got right to the point. Aaron was overwhelmed. The business was unstable. His wife had started part-time work. The kids were acting out. He needed support. Temporary. Structured. Since I had medical experience, flexibility, and no children of my own, it made sense that I step in for a season. A season. I still admire the architecture of it. Never say unpaid labor. Say support. Never say move in and manage his medications, meals, appointments, bookkeeping, and moods. Say help family through a hard patch. Never say your brother has consumed every available adult, and we are now circling back to the daughter account. Say this is what families do. I let her finish. Then I took out a legal pad and built Aaron a care plan. Home health nursing consult. Case management. Blood pressure monitoring. Therapy referral. Financial advisor. Structured debt worksheet. Couples counseling if they'd take it. Meal delivery for 6 weeks. 2 vetted handymen who could subcontract overflow jobs until his schedule stabilized. My mother looked at the page like it smelled offensive. "We are not turning family business over to strangers," she said. And there it was. Not health. Not support. Position. She did not want Aaron cared for. She wanted me reassigned. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. "No," I said. Her face changed very slightly. Not into rage. My mother was too refined for public rage. It became something colder. Administrative. "You have always confused independence with ingratitude," she said. I almost laughed because if there is one thing manipulative people cannot bear, it is a woman who no longer needs them to explain her own life back to her. A week later, the town campaign began. Prayer requests that somehow made it to people I had not spoken to in years. Messages from cousins about letting go of the past. A voicemail from Aaron saying he guessed he had overestimated what kind of sister I wanted to be. 3 women from church dropped a tuna casserole at my apartment with a note that said for all families under strain. Every dish was propaganda with breadcrumbs. And then the offer came. My mother called on a Thursday evening while I was sorting bills at my kitchen counter. She sounded warm, almost tender. "There's something your brother and I have discussed," she said. "We want to make things right. That phrase is bait made of sugar." She named the number. $25,700. I sat down slowly. That was not the full amount taken from the education account. It was not even close once you counted years, interest, and what debt had cost me in overtime and exhausted choices. But it was too specific to be random. Big enough to tempt. Precise enough to imply they had calculated the cheapest possible version of conscience. In exchange, of course, there would need to be a reset. No more bringing up old misunderstandings. No more involving old family friends. A season at Aaron's house until things normalized. Help with the kids after school. Help organizing the office. Help steadying him emotionally after the stress I had added by staying distant. There are offers so offensive they loop around into clarity. I understood all at once that they were not repaying me. They were trying to buy back silence while repurchasing labor. The amount itself almost impressed me. Somewhere around a dining room table, these people had sat down and priced my future, my debt, my 20s, my illness, my grandmother's warning, and my continued utility. They had put a figure on restoration the way you put a number on a used appliance. I said I would think about it. Then I called June. Then Theo. Then, because every tragedy needs one person who loves you without agenda, I called my neighbor Cora upstairs, who brought down banana bread and said, before I'd finished explaining, if the money has strings, it isn't money. It's a leash with nicer packaging. The next Sunday, I drove to my mother's house. The dining room looked exactly as it had when I was a child being corrected for breathing too loudly during grace. White tablecloth, good china, pot roast, candles and daylight because my mother believed ambience could overpower evidence. Aaron was there with his wife, Melissa. Their boys were in the den. My mother had arranged the room so expertly it took intention to remember I was entering an ambush. She slid the envelope across after dessert. I didn't open it. I already knew the number. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. When the hospital called, I said, "What did you tell yourself about why you didn't come?" You could have heard the clock in the hallway clearing its throat. Aaron looked down first. Melissa froze with her coffee halfway lifted. My mother smiled the smile she used when church women asked impolite things. "That isn't a productive question," she said. I waited. Silence is a pressure instrument if you can hold it long enough. Aaron broke before she did. "You always do this," he muttered. "You take one thing and turn it into a whole indictment. One thing. One pulmonary embolism. One stolen education fund. One family myth built on my usefulness. One little misunderstanding." My mother straightened the edge of her napkin. "You had made your feelings about this family very clear for years," she said. I wasn't going to reward another episode. There it was. My near-death had been interpreted as theater because theater was cheaper than guilt. I reached into my bag and placed the photocopy of the acknowledgement on the tablecloth. Not the original. I had learned something by then. Nobody touched it, but every face at that table recognized the shape of a secret turned visible. Aaron actually went gray. Melissa looked at him, then at my mother, and in that exact pivot, I watched an entire marriage receive unwanted context. My mother recovered first, naturally. "Your grandmother was an emotional woman," she said. I have no memory of deciding to smile, but I did. "Funny," I said. That's not what everybody else called her when she was keeping the whole family alive. I slid the unopened envelope back toward her. "No," I said. "Not because I'm unforgiving. Because I finally understand the terms." Aaron found his voice enough to snap. "So, what? You want to punish us forever?" And this is the strangest part of the whole story. I felt no triumph. No fireworks. No righteous flood. Just relief. Pure, clean relief. Because he had finally said the quiet part in a sentence short enough to hold. In his mind, refusing reassignment was punishment. Refusing access was cruelty. Declining to resume payment was vengeance. That is how families like mine survive themselves. They redefine your escape as your attack. I stood up. I looked at my mother and said, very gently because it was true, "I hope someday you learn the difference between being needed and being loved." Then I left. The campaign against me intensified for a while. Of course it did. Systems do not enjoy losing free labor. I heard I had humiliated my grieving mother. I heard I had weaponized old paperwork. I heard I had turned materialistic over money my grandmother wouldn't have wanted dividing the family. I heard Aaron was doing his best, and I was cold. Melissa stopped speaking to half the town for reasons I suspect had my mother's handwriting all over them. 2 aunts removed me from a group chat that had not included me in months. And I answered none of it. This is maybe the most important thing I did. I did not defend myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I did not produce documents for spectators. I did not circulate timelines. I did not annotate my own pain for a public that preferred casserole to complexity. I let the stories stand where they said it. Not because their version was true, because my peace had finally become more expensive than their approval. About 4 months later, the County Health Foundation announced a grant cycle for underserved respiratory care projects. Normally, I would have scrolled right past. I had nearly died, maxed out part of my savings, and spent enough nights staring at bills to qualify as an astronomer. Dreaming big felt adolescent. Then I found my grandmother's grocery receipt sketch in an old planner. Lena's place to breathe. 2 rocking chairs. And I remembered what capability could look like when no one was stealing it. I wrote the application in 8 nights. A rural pulmonary recovery center. Post-hospital follow-up, respiratory education, smoking cessation, supervised rehab, home oxygen support, grief-informed family coaching for caregivers and patients who had spent too long confusing love with depletion. I named it the Elsie House before I could talk myself out of the tenderness of that. The grant came through. Not all of it. Enough to make failure suddenly a choice instead of a sentence. I took a small business loan. Cora invested $5,000. She said she'd only waste on a new kitchen anyway. Theo volunteered 1 evening a week on opening quarter if I promised to stop calling it volunteerism and start calling it what it was. Family built by consent. We opened 14 months after the parking garage. Brick storefront. 3 treatment rooms. 1 group room. A wall painted the exact soft blue of inhaler caps. 2 rocking chairs out front, because a blueprint is sometimes also a blessing. On opening day, June taped my grandmother's grocery receipt in a frame behind the desk. The first patient through the door was a retired machinist with COPD, who cried when I showed him how to use the portable concentrator he'd been too embarrassed to ask about in the big hospital clinic. The second was a woman caring for her husband after lung surgery who kept apologizing for being tired until I told her tired was not a moral failure. By the 3rd week, I knew we had built the right thing. In month 2, my brother walked in. Not as a donor. Not as an ambush. As a patient referral. Hypertension, anxiety, early congestive changes, and a man finally old enough to discover that the body keeps books even when families lie about theirs. He stood in the lobby holding intake paperwork and looked smaller than I had ever seen him. I did not throw him out. I did not hug him either. I handed him a clipboard and said, "Insurance card too, please." He almost smiled. Almost. On the emergency contact line, he paused for a long time. Then he wrote Melissa's name. That mattered more than any apology he could have improvised. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a cashier's check for $4,000 and 1 note in Aaron's cramped print. First real payment I've made with my own money. No conditions. I know it doesn't fix anything. I deposited it into the clinic scholarship fund for local respiratory therapy students. Every payment since has gone there. Because some debts should never be collected by the person they were used against. They should be redirected into a future where the pattern has less room to breathe. My mother has never visited the clinic. I hear about her through town weather. Through June. Through an aunt who still thinks forwarding prayer chain emails counts as neutrality. Apparently, she tells people I've made peace in my own way, which is her version of admitting she no longer controls the narrative. Apparently, she still sets an extra place at Thanksgiving and makes sure everyone notices it. Apparently, she has become very interested in the language of boundaries now that other people use it on her. Sometimes that makes me sad. Not guilty. Not tempted.
Sad.
Because once you finally see the machine in a person, you also see the original wound that powered it. My mother was raised by scarcity, silence, and men whose comfort outranked her future. She learned early that love goes to the useful child and survival belongs to the one who can extract. She passed it on dressed as duty, understanding that did not require me to crawl back inside it. That is the last trick families like mine try to teach you, that compassion and surrender are synonyms. They are not. Last winter, I got a Christmas card with no signature inside. Just a line in careful blue ink. I did come to the parking garage after all. I was too late. I sat with that sentence a long time. Part of me was 6 years old and wanted to run after it barefoot. Part of me was 33 in ICU with an empty chair beside the bed. Part of me was the woman who signed the clinic lease and finally learned that late is not the same as love. I put the card in a drawer. Not a shrine. Not evidence. Just a fact. There is a laminated card in my wallet now. Cora made me carry it after I forgot to update my file at the dentist, and Theo threatened bodily harm if I kept outsourcing my mortality to chance. It says, Emergency Contact 1, Theo Jenkins. Emergency Contact 2, Cora Watts. Emergency Contact 3, June Harrow. No blood. Only people who come. that, it turns out, is the whole biography of healing in one small rectangle. If your own family ever taught you that your usefulness was your membership fee, I want you to hear me clear. You do not owe lifelong access as repayment for being raised. You do not owe your future to anyone who already spent part of it. And when people who mistake your strength for available inventory come back talking about healing, support, togetherness, second chances, tradition, burden, duty, or what family does, listen past the poetry. Ask one question. Under these terms, who pays? If the answer is still you, it is not reconciliation. It is just the old invoice in a fresh envelope. And if you're standing at your own kitchen table right now with some version of that envelope in your hands, wondering whether refusing it makes you cruel, let me save you a year of therapy and one almost fatal misunderstanding.
No.
It makes you the first honest accountant your family has ever had.